All right, well, let's get to chatting about a decentralized substrate for computing. So this is a talk that that I wanted to give to just paint a picture of about how what are the next steps to get to establish Filecoin as a platform for applications and so on. Storage, of course, in computing is not just about the data that you store in a network. It's really about the computation that you do on that network. It's about the applications that you build, and it's about the things that you can do with that data. So there's a lot of things that stand between where we are now and kind of like a full Web3 oriented application platform for the broader public, for consumers and beyond. And what I wanted to do in this talk is kind of talk about where we are with Filecoin now, connected a bit to other networks out there, and really kind of make a case for what are the things that we should be as a community working on in the next few months to kind of make significant headway towards just really building that kind of platform. So I tend to talk about computing platforms as giving us these amazing superpowers and enabling a lot of different kinds of applications to be built, enabling different kinds of tools and systems that deploy some ability for us to do something we couldn't do before. So, for example, video chat or video stream, as we're doing now, or some edit a document together, watching an explanation, live stream, play a game together. All those kind of superpowers that we didn't have before are now here thanks to our computing platforms. But Web3 right now is a bit far from enabling and empowering all of the kind of like the bulk of the computation that people do in the world. Most of that today is done through Web2 platforms that are highly centralized. And there's a lot of kind of advantages that those systems have, and so on. And Web3 is still in development and still coming. And so, what are the kind of things that we have to do as a group to kind of start breaking into a bunch of these application systems and a bunch of these application platforms? So I'll start talking about a few, and I won't. I'll kind of jump around and talk about a few different things. Nothing here is prescriptive. All of it is just meant as inspirational for groups out there that want to make some headway in these directions. So before jumping into these applications, I want to make a quick note about the platforms that are coming in the future. So one of the big important things that we should remember is that it's not just about financial systems. It's not just about consumer applications. Computing tends to reinvent itself. Every 20 to 30 years, there's large new platforms that arrive. And the ones in the horizon right now, there's a few kind of that are contending to be that next platform. But there are things like augmented reality, virtual reality, and brain-machine interfaces. Of course, those are maybe further out, but definitely augmented reality and virtual reality are fairly close. So, a couple words about those platforms. Right now, the large major shift in platforms on the internet was that one of social networks, where a huge fraction of the population in the world started experiencing the internet as just what they see in the social networks, just the tooling that sites like Facebook and so on give them, the ability to message each other, the ability to form groups, the ability to spread information, the ability to kind of react to that information in a social network kind of way, the ability to share video. So that's the main large platform shift that happened kind of like after mobile, right? So there was the web, then there was kind of the Web 2 dynamic web with a bunch of different possibilities, and mobile sort of came in as part of that as another platform shift. And then really the social networks that had been started in that era came in and sort of locked in across the world to now kind of be the main way by which hundreds of millions of people, billions of people communicate every day. So those platforms, these social networks, are fundamentally different than the early internet or than the early web. The early internet and the early web were both very open environments where anybody could add resources to the network, anybody could add information, anybody could add links. Everybody kind of had full control of the experience. There was no kind of ulterior motives hidden and lurking in as like tracking pixels and all these kinds of tools. Over time, those systems, as the social networks came in, most of that information started disappearing and moving to these well-designed and well-constructed experiences in social networks that started gathering all of these groups of people and making those platforms not only incredibly useful, and by the way, that social networks have done an enormous amount of good in the world in connecting people and enabling us to better communicate with each other and stay in touch with a lot of our communities and our families and so on. It's kind of hard to imagine a world without social networks now. But at the same time, these platforms did so in a way that put the corporations that built those platforms in full control of the user experience and ultimately the psychological and the psychological experience of the people going through those systems. And that also drives behavior, as we've seen recently with all of the kind of misinformation and so on that has happened. Whoever controls the social networks right now and what people are saying in them has a big ability to drive behavior of people around the planet. And my perspective is that this is just the tip of the iceberg on what's going to be possible in the future, what people are going to be able to do in the future, controlling certain kinds of interfaces and systems and computing platforms. I think that as soon as we get the first fully immersive VR experiences or AR experiences that are high quality enough for millions of people to use, the world is going to change again, and dramatically so. I think that change is going to be very fast, like the social networks change, which was quite fast. I think that the VR AR world will change very quickly once we manage to get past a few hurdles, right? So right now VR is finishing kind of next iterations of devices and dropping the price points and so on. But that's basically around 3 to 8 years away from getting to kind of a consumer level device that is cheap enough for a lot of people around the planet to afford, and could have high fidelity enough that the experience is actually very good and so on. At the same time, there's these there's a whole creation of the experiences. Are there going to be games? Are there going to be other kinds of media that are going to emerge thanks to the new medium? All of that is still kind of figured out. But what we do know is that whoever's in control of those platforms and those experiences is going to be able to, in effect, create the reality of hundreds of millions of people or billions of people around the world in a way that has never been done before. We're talking about fully being able to define experiences that are so close to real that that will become extremely difficult to disconnect from. And so if we think that misinformation today is a problem, we're sailing straight towards completely created and fabricated realities that'll be very difficult to shake. So I think it's extremely important that as a society we establish dramatically better platforms ahead of when ahead of augmented reality and virtual reality platforms. So when those arrive, we should already have a dramatically better computing platform that it does not kind of lock in the data and does not hold users hostage to a few parties. And in order to get there, we have to do a lot of work between now and then to prove out how these decentralized storage platforms and computing platforms can work, make all of the developer tooling actually work well, make the user tooling work well, so that we can build these kinds of systems to be preferred by application developers. At the end of the day, the platform that is going to win and the platform that is going to be dominant in any computing infrastructure is the one that manages to give the best experience to users and developers both. Meaning it has to be good enough for developers to do what they need to do and to build the experiences and applications they want. And it has to be phenomenal for users and really be the best experience that users have to choose. And getting there is not easy. And so Web3 has been very focused on the world of finance and new kinds of legal mechanisms in kind of smart contracts and kind of like an internet native legal structure. But we haven't been very focused on the consumer side of things. I mean, there have been a number of attempts and a number of groups that have tried to do that kind of stuff, but we haven't really broken through. And from our perspective, the things that are missing that have been missing so far were the ability to deploy applications end-to-end completely in a Web3 native way. And so that means being able to store the data and the computation around it. And then separately, the ability to get to the users and to get these applications in front of large volumes of users. And the second is really a function of the first, meaning getting to large numbers of users really depends on having a killer application that is actually really high quality and kind of consumer oriented, and where people are choosing to use it, not because it's decentralized, but because it's the best application they want to use for whatever that thing they're trying to do is. And so for the first one, in order to really build out that platform, we need a few things that developers really need. We need the ability to store arbitrary amounts of data and retrieve arbitrary amounts of data very quickly, so low latency for the users. We need to do those two things cheaply, but more importantly, we need to be able to do that along with computation, meaning we need to be able to do very efficient, large-scale computation of the data that we store. And so this is a fundamentally different form of computation than what blockchains have done so far. Blockchains so far have been extremely good for kind of small computations overall, but that are very important to be trustworthy, where you really can afford to pay a massive expense for a little bit of computation. And so where we need to head to is a platform that has proper cloud scale level storage and computation in a cheaper cost model than the cloud offers today. If it's not cheaper and it's not better UX-wise, it won't win. And so that's the target. Now, how do we get there? It's a tall order. So I think it really boils down to this kind of flow, where if you get the data and you enable computation on that data, and you make that cheaper and faster and better dev UX, if you get those things right, then applications will flow to that platform and the applications will bring the users. So we have to get this right. And this has not been true for Web3 yet. We haven't gotten these things right. So let's talk about how to get the data and how to get the computation. So we're standing today with a network that is super large. We have hundreds of petabytes of capacity. We're closing in on an exabyte, which is a truly staggering size of data. That's more data than most applications ever need in kind of the smaller scales. So we could get to many applications to millions or tens of millions of users very easily. Now, just with the capacity that we have today. Now, of course, if we want to rival and compete with the large players, then we'll have to hit in the tens to hundreds of exabytes, and we're kind of on track to grow towards that. But we don't need any more. I think we've reached an excellent level of capacity, and now we have to focus on making that capacity actually very useful for applications and for the storage of data in the large. So this is kind of like a view of the network storage growth. And so really we have to shift the focus of the community towards making this storage very useful these systems and these applications and so on. And we can start with all of the Web3 apps that exist already in the IPFS ecosystem, right? So all of these applications already use IPFS. The combined volume of that data is probably, a few terabytes, maybe closing in on a petabyte, but it's not that much. We can store all of that data on Filecoin and replicate it many times over and not worry about kind of, and we'll still have tons of capacity left over. So, one kind of first order of business for the network as a whole is to really kind of go through, go and get in touch with all of the folks that are using IPFS and talk to them about, hey, how useful, what is your current data storage system? Like, how might that be easier, better, cheaper, faster, and for you to use Filecoin, and really take their feedback as extremely useful feedback to help perfect and hone the product quality and the product UX of Filecoin, right? So if somebody there's a bunch of applications there that are already very excited to jump on Filecoin and are already starting to transition their data sets and their application front ends and so on over to Filecoin. But some of them probably won't yet, and that'll be very good places to get feedback to then improve the platform and get it to a better stage. And this is kind of like a very natural set of users for Filecoin, because they're already content addressing everything with IPFS. Using Filecoin will be a pretty straightforward, easy thing to do. And a lot of them are already crypto native. So a lot of them are already dApps that use crypto tokens in some way. And so they'll be able to kind of use and transact with Filecoin in a fairly straightforward way. Now, kind of thinking ahead beyond that, there's a few data sets that I think are very important for the community to work on. And so the first one is developer assets. If we take this tremendous capacity of storage that we have with Filecoin, and we make it very useful to developers worldwide, if we make it very cheap and fast to store all of the developer assets that people tend to need when they're making applications or building systems, then those developers are going to A, be excited about Filecoin as a network, and B, will then start playing around with Filecoin and using it, and we'll start helping contribute to Filecoin and help develop it as a technology. And so, in a sense, creating a lot of value for developers worldwide will help bring them as a group to the problems that we're working with, and will help scale the network. And so kind of directions here include, hey, go to provide a super cheap and easy way to replicate packages and distribute them. Drop the bandwidth bills for all of the package manager folks everywhere. Drop the bills for everybody distributing containers. Really make Filecoin the #1 place where developer assets go to. And if we can do that, then that will drive a large amount of usage to the network. And I think that this is something that we're as a community, very well poised for at the moment. The network can already take all of these kinds of assets. There's a bunch of tooling that people have built to ingest a lot of these package managers and to kind of replicate them and create mirrors on IPFS. I think the next step from there is making the distribution and the delivery really fast. That is something I think right now will probably not be as good. And so that's an area for people to work on. Then containers is a whole other angle that we're starting to hit on. There's a talk earlier in the conference about being able to do kind of like a decentralized Docker hub with IPFS and Filecoin. So definitely look at those tools. But I think another approach might be just to get in touch with Docker Hub itself to distribute all of the containers. Now, then we start to think about kind of more other kinds of developer-oriented tooling. I think one really useful talk that we had earlier today was around the machine learning datasets world. If we can make Filecoin an excellent tool for for distributing machine learning data sets and for computing on them, that is going to A, be an extremely useful and valuable use case, but B, is going to, again, bring a lot of developers to experience the platform. I encourage you to check the Nebula cloud that Charles talked about. Definitely play around with it, try using it, and so on. And I would further encourage you to start thinking about taking all of the large-scale machine learning data sets that exist and replicating them, all these open access machine learning data sets, and replicating them to Filecoin. If we do that and we make it really cheap and easy to store all of that data, well, data has gravity, and once the data is in some place, moving it is kind of expensive. So it's much easier and faster to just move the computation to that data. So as soon as that data is in the Filecoin network, that'll just attract a lot of developers to compute with the data on Filecoin. And so, platforms like this one that will kind of disseminate and distribute the computation to all of these nodes out there, and then kind of return the results, could be really, really successful. Now, a hurdle here, of course, is how do you do proper kind of verifiable computation on this? I mean, that can be an extremely expensive thing to do, or at least have a good enough trust model behind the computation such that you don't have to worry about the intermediate results being leaked or being tampered with. Another one that I think is very promising is to look at the successes of organizations like Audius and like Ujo and others, where you can build a platform for music artists that want to connect closer to their fans and want to build a social network with them, and kind of directly publish and distribute their music and their creations to their fan base, and work on a systems and tools for making these kinds of applications very easy to move over to things like Filecoin. So, for example, all of the Audius music dataset is already in IPFS, so it's all addressable there, and it's very easy to move over. So that's something that should be fairly straightforward for anybody to do. And both projects are super open, so if somebody's interested in doing that, I think that could go a long way. Similar to music, I think video is one of the core use cases that we should be going after, if not the core one. Video represents the majority of the bandwidth usage of the internet, especially going to consumers. Kind of data center flow is other kinds of computation, but data center to consumers, the bulk of that bandwidth is video, and humans consume an enormous amount of video. And if we can get the distribution pipeline of video to be cheaper and faster with Filecoin, then that will create an improvement rate on the technology, and a kind of market success for the broader platform that'll be very, very that could be kind of like the killer application to really drive Filecoin to be a great platform, right? So and this is one part of that is the dealing with all the developer experience oriented workflows. So for example, the transcoding that the LivePeer does and demoed here in this really cool application where you can kind of already disseminate video with LivePeer and Filecoin. You drag and drop a video, the transcoding happens thanks to LivePeer, and then the video stored on Filecoin and then kind of distributed out. This kind of thing, proves out how distribution platforms for video could work with LivePeer and Filecoin. And if we can make it an extremely useful set of tooling for video distribution websites and for live streaming websites, then that could be kind of like the killer application that drives the success of Filecoin and broader Web3, right? So again, because video is just such a big fraction of the traffic on the internet, it makes perfect sense for us to kind of attack it as a kind of first killer use case. And I think we're in great shape there, and we're kind of, as a community, we're trying out a lot of experiments there. I think it would be really great to to think about kind of like what would be existing websites that might transfer their video libraries over to be stored with Filecoin, or what new video oriented platforms could be created in Web3 that maybe couldn't really be done in Web2, that then could leverage the tooling that we have here to succeed. The next one I want to kind of talk about is really games. So games are one of the biggest set of experiences that people have with computers, and games have been the source of just a tremendous amount of activity and development and inspiration and technology has been made just for building better and better games. And so in a big way, over the decades, games have pushed the limits of computing, have dragged computing in various directions. You can think of like all of the GPU stuff that is really good for machine learning now is really being fueled and powered by the game industry. And so games, of course, have really large assets to really produce these rich, high quality experiences. Games must distribute a lot of data to users, and so it's again, like video, a perfect use case for Filecoin. And there's an easy way to start here, which is to take all of these open source games that have a lot of assets to distribute, and normally you have these open source communities that have to pay a bunch of money to store the content and distribute the content and so on, and just store all of this stuff for free for them. Like if we as a community go and offer free storage for all of these folks, they'll be thankful for that and get excited about this kind of platform, but also it'll start getting them thinking about a different kind of way of combining game assets. So especially because they're open source, you could think about combining the assets across different games. So you can suddenly start building these libraries of open source assets and then creating games in a much easier and faster way. Now that'll only work for some kinds of experiences. Of course, some really high quality games will require and of course very detailed work only for that game and so on. But even there, the distribution possibilities with Filecoin are pretty great, especially if we can reduce the bandwidth consumption dramatically. So this is somewhere where IPFS becomes a killer advantage. So the storage deduplication and kind of resumption of downloads that IPFS provides because of the hash linking across the datasets gives you the kind of smart syncing that you have with something like Git, but for large scale data. And this is something that a lot of game app stores and distribution platforms have had to build for themselves and often don't work or often don't reuse the bandwidth across their user base. So think of being able to offer the game industry as a whole and all of the kind of game developers out there a distribution model that's similar to kind of like what Blizzard did with BitTorrent way back when, where they use peer-to-peer to help accelerate their bandwidth usage, and also have kind of like a very well version controlled high integrity checking of the data to make sure that it's correct in transit and so on. And if any of the files get corrupted, they get updated and so on. If you've played games a lot, you might have encountered many circumstances where something happens locally, some file gets corrupted, and you don't know, and then suddenly the game stops working. You could build automatic integrity checking across all of this just with IPFS, and that tooling might be kind of the killer advantage that pushes Filecoin and Web3 to be the #1 way to distribute games in the future. And I think that this is probably one of the most important things to work on, because if we get this right, then games are the gateway to VR as well. And so if we get it working for games now, then it'll be the dominant distribution platform for games in VR. And once that happens, then that starts creating an inroad to kind of keeping VR open. And a place to start here is really look at the crypto native worlds. So let's look at Decentraland and CryptoVoxels. And these are really amazing, wonderful environments that you can go and spend time in today and go hang out and explore and start interacting with other people with, and kind of you can kind of have, there's a bunch of like really cool art galleries that are cropping up in both of these platforms. If I spend a fair amount of time just exploring and browsing around and looking at amazing creativity that people are pouring into these worlds. And let's make all of these storage commons be crypto native. Let's move them. Let's start by replicating all of this data for them, and then use that as a way to kind of improve the tooling, perfect it, and get to a point where other virtual worlds like these, their best bet for winning would be to use Filecoin. And if we can get these things right, get it right for virtual worlds, get it right for games, for open source games, then that'll create a pathway for the whole games industry of the future to really use Filecoin. So I really think that these are the core use cases, not the core use cases. This is like an opinion here. A lot of other people have a bunch of other ideas, but if we focus on getting the data and allowing computation around the data for virtual worlds, games, video, and other kinds of media, and machine learning and developer assets, like those are, I think, the next use cases that we should be really focusing on. And so as a broader community, nobody can do all of these things at once. No one group is gonna work on this, on all of this, but different groups can work on each one. And so if you're a group out there, or a company, or just a community that is interested in pushing Web3 or pushing contributing to Filecoin, or contributing to these communities, really consider taking on this large use case directly. And this is something where the Filecoin community as a whole might be very interested in supporting that work. So probably you can probably apply for grants in the future grant waves, or there might be funding for companies that kind of form around this kind of thing. So it's a lot of parties and a lot of groups building on IPFS and Filecoin and Web3 in general. And if one of the groups out there goes and attacks one of these use cases and really nails it, they could actually get pretty significant funding to build an organization to do this. So after, I think these are the kind of important use cases ahead. If we get these things going, simultaneously, we should just recall that there's a ton of applications on IPFS that will start migrating their storage over to Filecoin, and there's already a lot of organizations in the broader Filecoin ecosystem. The next important set of things is to help onboard a lot of developers to these platforms. And so we already had a lot of great success with HackFS and the Apollo program earlier this year. And so continuing to do this as a community, continuing to do these hackathons, to build out a lot of stuff, to improve the developer experience, explain a lot of stuff out there to developers, make things easier. That is going to cause an improvement loop over the entire platform that will both perfect the tooling, but also create the seeding ground for a lot of teams to get the knowledge of how to do this work. And some of these applications will go on to succeed, but I think a much larger fraction of teams will go on to succeed, meaning a lot of teams that met through these hackathons, or that their first project through these hackathons, will go on to create really valuable applications, and they will have gotten their start in these kinds of events. So I really think this kind of stuff is really important to kind of see the application creation grounds of the community. And then you have to support that growth, right? So as soon as there are applications that come out of these hackathons, or even if just people are developing it on their own, as a community, we should help support that growth. And so this is where things like accelerators are really useful. And so we've been, Protocol Labs has been committing to do this, and we launched an accelerator with Consensus called Filecoin Launchpad, and it's powered by Tachyon. And it's ongoing and really successful, and that's going super well. There's another one called the Filecoin Frontier Accelerator, and this is with Fenbushi Capital and Long Hash Ventures. Those are really, these two programs are ongoing and going to be, I think we'll see kind of like a wave of applications being built with them. But I really want to invite the broader community to create your own versions of these programs that support the builders in the space, whether it's by grants and creating kind of waves of grant funding, like Protocol Labs and the Filecoin Foundation now are going to be doing, or accelerators or investments or things like that. At the end of the day, applications take a lot of work and time to build. you need to be able to fund people for many months to a year or so to go out and really own a use case and really build it out. And so I really think this kind of improvement loop of supporting new teams to learn the technology, give them space to develop and try out building applications, and then support their growth through things like accelerators or grants. Getting these things right is going to kind of, in a sense, get the applications to be built in Filecoin. And these are new applications. Of course, simultaneously, we could be going out to the Web 2 world and kind of getting a bunch of the applications that are out there to kind of move their storage over to Filecoin and kind of like do these kinds of larger kind of business development oriented work. And that's a super promising area as well. I think this is where kind of goes back to these use cases. Go talk to large players in the video space. Go talk to large players in the game space, and talk to them about Filecoin, talking about the use cases. Figure out what tooling they need. Go build that tooling, and then kind of onboard those groups. So this is again a huge avenue for massive amount of potential. I think there's a lot of video players, video websites out there that are not associated with directly a massive cloud company, right? So think of YouTube. YouTube success is in great part because they are able to rely on the Google infrastructure. Not every video player out there has that. There's a lot of video players that would love to be able to work with a super powerful storage network and storage and computing network. And if we can provide that for them, then that will become a tremendous draw. And if we can drop the cost of storage, if we can drop the cost of bandwidth, then that'll enable existing Web 2 oriented businesses and platforms to start migrating over to Filecoin. So that's another, I really think that's a huge business opportunity, because all you have to do as a business developer there is figure out what the cost structure would be for them to store their data on Filecoin and the bandwidth, and figure out what's cheaper and how much cheaper it is. Go talk to them and say, hey, we can do your entire distribution flow this much cheaper, and you can charge them some fraction of that cost, and it can be pretty sizable. And so this is, I think, a potentially a pretty significant startup company type of opening. So if you're a team that's interested in doing that, definitely pursue it and reach out to folks for help and funding in getting that. Great. So hopefully that has got us to talk about the data distribution and kind of the initial data sets and getting the applications. I want to kind of close by reminding us that at the end of the day, it's really about running computation, right? So we're really talking about being able to compute along with the data. So once we move the data to the Filecoin network and it's stored in with Filecoin miners and so on, the critical kind of important piece there to make these applications really work is going to be the ability to run computation around that data. So that means whether it's for free or for small payments or whatever, systems and applications that couple with Filecoin to enable computation over those data sets will be potentially super successful. So if you're building a project around computation in Web3, definitely come talk to us and come to talk to a lot of the people in the Filecoin community, because this can be kind of like a superpower where the data is there already, and then the computation just kind of comes in and it's additional revenue for Filecoin miners, right? So a potential possibility here is, think of clouds, computing clouds like Golem and many others that might emerge, being able to couple with Filecoin, where kind of a Filecoin miner can be simultaneously a miner for Filecoin and for Golem or whatever the computing platform may be. And there, that is a very large scale problem. There's all kinds of ins and outs to how to do that right in Web3. Should you do verifiable computation? Should you do kind of trust and or kind of like check the computation, but without having to do any kind of extensive cryptographic proofs? Should you rely on reputation systems? Should you rely on mechanisms that are part reputation, part kind of proving misbehavior and so on? Or should you have some other arrangements with between the parties. That's all open. That's like a super, I think, open area for development, and I think that's kind of a large arc for Web3 will be how to do that computation well. I think today the trajectory of scaling for blockchains won't hit that on its own, meaning blockchains are right now struggling to kind of scale in terms of transaction throughput. We're going to see the first chains that achieve high scalability arriving kind of in the upcoming year or 2 years. But that is still kind of very far away from the true magnitude of computation that these systems have to do, right? So actually supporting a cloud storage and computing environment with a kind of throughput for data flows that are pretty large is orders of magnitude away from where blockchains are today. And so this is going to be fundamentally a different kind of system. It'll be probably coordinated and scheduled over blockchains, but the computation itself will be kind of delegated out to computing nodes. And so very much kind of like the Golem architecture, but we'll probably see a lot of different variations on it as people incorporate different kinds of proof systems and so on, or verification reputation systems. And I think that in a big way is still kind of to be figured out. And today you can't really issue computation the way that you can in kind of Amazon EC2 or Lambda over these kinds of networks. But we could be doing that in a very short time period. The one big hurdle was, where are you going to store all the assets and the data and the code and all that kind of stuff? And hey, we've solved that. Now we have this network. But the next part is, how do you do the scheduling of computation to really go over all of that data? And so we have the inroads of that. We have, already there was a presentation earlier in this conference about doing kind of like a Lambda style computation thing on top of Filecoin, and there was a this kind of machine learning oriented platform that we saw earlier today. These are very good directions. We'll see how they play out over the next few months. I'm incredibly excited for all of the stuff that people are going to build, and kind of close it here and say, I'd love to get to a point where in the future I can have a slide with all of these kinds of applications flowing through Filecoin and Web3. The last one I'll maybe mention is Decentralized App Stores are really a big piece of this. So the big kind of gatekeeper of all of the application platform world is the app stores. And so that means the platform app stores and the game app stores. Decentralizing those and creating a super high quality experience app store is the frontier. And I think like somebody who manages to build that and build it very well is going to contribute greatly to Web3.